Doing the top 10 teachings of Brachos Daf Mem Aleph. That's 41 of Masechtas Brachos, and we're dealing right in the thick of the different brachot, the blessings that we make on food. In particular, the order of the blessings is going to be very much discussed, and perhaps one way of looking at the whole framework for this daf is understanding the kind of contradiction in terms of when you like something, when you want something, there's a great need to both recognize what it is that you like and what you want, and also to create a blessing, which in Kabbalah and Hasidus, a blessing represents a connection, a flow between a higher source and yourself, that there's a link, kind of like a wire or a wireless connection. It's a spiritual connection. And why is that so important to create that connection? Is particularly in the areas of the things that we like, there's an importance of recognizing that we want to connect our likes. We want to connect our things that we like and love to the source of those things, which is the Ribono Shalom, which is the master of the world. So very quickly, I'm going to read through the top 10, and then we're going to go them over in more details. The first is a debate about what should come first. The food that you like the most or love the most, versus if you have choices, that's the cases that we're talking about, is where you have various fruits in front of you. And some of the fruits are unique in that they appear in the verse that talks about the 7 species that Israel is blessed with. Eretz Chita, Sa'oratena, Begefen, Verimon, Eretz Zeis, Shemen, Udvash. I hope I didn't leave anybody out there. But basically, read the note. I think it's in note number 3 where I give the translation of that. So what if you have a pomegranate, you have a date, you have a grape, and then you have an apple, but you like apples more? Would you go after what you want to eat first, which is the apple, or do you take one of the fruits that Israel is praised with? So that's the first debate. The second thing is, we already discussed earlier the idea that sometimes a Hadamah, a blessing that you'd make on something that grows from the ground but isn't a fruit, that blessing would cover a fruit, but not in all instances, and that's what we're going to discuss. Many exceptions to the rule in terms of order. That's number 3. And number 4 is another understanding of that verse, which is the shiurim nemro, which means that all of the things in the verse teach us a specific lesson about a particular measurement. And this becomes applicable. This same Gemara appears almost identically in a number of places in Talmud, including in Masechtas Sukkah, which there it's in conjunction with talking about the height of the sukkah, but it's the same exact Gemara with a little twist in each place. So that's a important concept, which leads us into number 5, something that's relevant to Yom Kippur, which is coming up. Understanding the shear, the volume of what's considered a prohibition of eating on Yom Kippur. Why that amount isn't, let's say, the same amount of what eating matzah would be on Pesach. What's the reason for that? And number 6 is the Gemara says the shiurim are medarabanan, from the rabbis, which is a problem. Usually we don't say that. We go like Rab Chanan, who says it's based on this verse, so it's biblical, the amounts, or in other places in the Talmud, such as the Gemara in Sukkah that I just quoted, there it says it's a halacha l'Moshe Messinai, it's a received tradition, but here it says it's medarabanan. Is that a misprint? Is that a Is it really mean it's halacha l'moshe misin? So we'll discuss that as well. Number 7 is the story of Rav Chisda, Rav Hamnuna. Number 8 is, do you make a bracha on fruit during the meal? Number 9 is pas Haba bkisnin, during or after a meal, and that's a type of bread that's either a pocket bread with nuts and sweets in it, or something like that. And number 10 is Dvarim Haba, habaim, machmas, hasueda, things that come into the meal in the relationship to being part of the meal or not. Okay, so we got our top 10. That's the rough outline of what they are. And now we're going to look at them in greater detail. So the Gemara in Mem Aleph Amud Aleph in Bracha says the following: Amar Ula, particular Amora, but by the name of Ula, states that there's a debate, machlokas b'shir and Shavot. The debate between Rabbi Yehuda and the sages is when the two items, the two food items, have the same blessing. And we're talking about, again, the example that I gave would be the apples and the dates. And Rabbi Yehuda said, min shiva adif. Rabbi Yehuda would hold one of the 7 species, which in this case would be the date, is more valuable because it appears in the verse, and you'd make the bracha on the date, and then automatically the Haitz would cover the apple as well. The rabbis hold, no, it's what you like. You want to eat the apple, you love apples, so you do the mitzvah, you make the bracha on the thing that you really want and like. And in this opinion, which again is going to be argued on later in the same daf, the same amud, it says if there are different foods that one has a blessing of Haitz and another one has Hadamah. So for example, there's a date and a potato, then in that case you just, according to the way the majority of the Rishonim understand it, is you just pick whichever one it is that you want and you make the bracha on that. In other words, the whole concept of the 7 species taking precedence is only when it's just choosing which fruit that you would make ha'etz on, you should make the ha'etz on, whether it's the apple or the date. But if it's a Hadamah on ha'etz, then it's just up to you. Now later on the Gemara is going to say, no, there's another opinion that says even Kishe'en Brachos and Shabbat, when they had different blessings, you still have to give, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the precedent to something with the 7 of the 7 species. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about this because on the one hand, we want to always connect what we're doing with the Torah. So it makes sense to why the Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is it's the same blessing. Why not give kavod, honor, to something that the Eretz Yisrael is blessed with? Now, what's the other opinion that says that chaviv adif, what you like better, should go first? And perhaps the explanation of what that means, of chaviv adif, is that the Torah is not trying to leave you out of the equation as a human being. And what that means is it wants to embrace who you are, what you like, your likes, your feelings need to be validated. And the blessing is not to undo who you are and to make you do something different than who you are, but it's to get you to, in the way you are, to elevate it, to bring it up, rather than to let it just go sink down. Especially since you're eating not because you're required to eat, you're eating normally because you're a normal person. You want to eat, so eat what you want to eat first, and then eat what you want to eat second. Why should the fact that somewhere in the Torah a verse appears about fruits affect what you want to do? In fact, the blessing is a blessing on what you like. That the fact that you get to do what you like in terms of what fruit you eat first, if anything, will enhance your blessing. I see this as a mode, for example, as a father and as a child of parents. I see this as a very important mitzvah of chinuch. What is it you're trying to do when you're trying to raise a child? Are you trying to constantly tell them that no, the way they would like to work is wrong, and there's a way that we're told to do things, and you're always telling them how to do this, and do that? Or do we take who they are and lift up who they are and show them that who they are is good? Doesn't mean everything about who they are is good. I'm sure there are things that every one of us, especially me, need to work on. But that could be an understanding of what does it mean that chaviv adif, to take what a person likes already and not to negate it, not to make it be second, but to enhance it and give it the kavod. You're giving yourself kavod, and you're giving the bracha kavod. Because if you see the bracha as a burden, then the whole point of the mitzvah is to not get into the level of tachas asher lo avadat Hashem l'kacha b'simcha v'tuv levav. That all of the calamities that happen to us is when we lose our way because we no longer serve God with love and with joy. So therefore, perhaps this mitzvah, as seemingly unimportant as it might appear, holds a very key element to what it is that we need to do, and two modes of education. Do we always find everything in Torah, or do we say no? As much as it is important, everything is in Torah, but if I don't find it within myself first, if I don't have chaviv, adif, if I don't have what I like to be what I get to make the blessing on, then it's leaving out a part of me. So that could be a deeper understanding of what the pshat in this debate is. That's number one. Number two is this thing of Hadamah and Haitz. Let me tell you a little bit about Hadamah and Haitz. We learned earlier that, let's say by accident you make a Hadamah on an apple. I don't know, you're absent-minded, and you make the Hadamah on the apple. Or, for example, you don't know you have a something that's let's say a berry. Now a berry you make Haitz on, but it's not so simple. Maybe you make a Hadamah on a berry. It doesn't look like a normal tree, right? So you think it's a Hadamah, and you make a Hadamah. So do you have to correct yourself, whether it's the apple or the berry, and then say Baruch Shem Kvad Malchuto L'Olam Vad, and then make the Haitz? And the answer is no. The Hadamah, because Hadamah is a more baser form that in theory would also cover Haitz, if that's what happened. You accidentally made a Hadamah on a fruit that should have needed Haitz. Rashi points out at least twice in this Daf Gemara, that we don't say that when you have fruits and vegetables in front of you, and let's say you are making a Hadamah first. Let's say I like to eat nuts, so I've got corn nuts, which are corn, essentially. It's not really nuts. A nut, like an almond, is Haitz. Corn nuts, which is just called a nut, but it's really toasted corn, is a Hadamah. So if I made the Hadamah on the corn nut, would I then have to make a Haitz on the almonds, on the roasted almonds? Or would it be covered by the fact that I made the Hadamah? And the Rashi says very clearly twice, and the commentaries say even more, that no, if you weren't making an accidental Hadamah, if I accidentally made a Hadamah on the almonds, then that would be okay. I wouldn't have to correct myself and make another bracha Haitz. But if I knew that I'm making the Hadamah on the corn nuts, then if that was the case, I do get to make a Haitz on the almonds. And some of the commentaries go so far as to say that even if you didn't think specifically one way or another about the almonds, meaning you didn't say, I'm making this on the corn nuts and not on the almonds to yourself, mentally, it doesn't matter, you still would make the Haitz. Okay, that's just point number two. And that's really relevant in how you read the Gemara. I'm not going to read it into the Gemara right now, but Rashi reads that into the Gemara. Number three is this verse, Eretz Chita Sod Gefem Esein Avrim on Eretz Shem and Dvash, the verse about the land of Israel. Now, I mentioned before that there's a debate about whether the machlokus, the debate between Rabbi Yehuda and the sages, is only Kishri Chosei and Shavot, only when you're talking about apple versus the date, which have the same bracha, of which one you'd make first, the apple that you like more, or the date because it's one of the Shiva minim, and Rabbi Yehuda says Shiva minim, the Chacham say Adif, the one that you like more. But there is another opinion. It says Pliga bar Rabami Aver Yitzchak Nafka one says, as we just said, that the debate is only when they have the same blessing, but the other one says that that Rabbi Yehuda and the sages debate even when they have two different blessings. When you're talking about a potato, which is a Hadamah, versus a Haitz, a date, which is Haitz, the debate will still be, the rabbis say, if you want the potato, you make the bracha on the potato first, and then you'll have to make another bracha on the Haitz. That's fine. But it doesn't matter that it's a date, and it's one of the things that the Eretz Yisrael is blessed with, because you want the potato. Rabbi Yehuda will say, no, you go after the thing that appears in the verse of the 7 species that Israel is praised with, and you make the Haitz on the date first, and then you go and make the bracha Hadamah. So the Gemara says, "B'mai pligi," what is the argument? And Rabbi Yirmiyah says, in the name of Rabbi Yosef or Rabbi Yitzchak, "Kol mukdam b'pasuk zeh mukdam lebracha." Whatever appears earlier in this verse is first to receive a blessing. Now, understand, most people make the mistake and think that this verse is talking about fruits. It actually isn't really talking about fruits on some level. It's talking about fruits as well as grains. Why? There's that Shenamar, as the verse says, right? This is a verse in Dvarim, chapter 8, verse 8. Eretz chitas are v'gefim stand of yom eretz today shem and vash. A land of wheat, barley, vines, figs, pomegranates, a land of olive oil, and date honey. Now we know that the first two of the things here, the wheat and the barley, are not fruits. Although there's an opinion that the tree that Adam ate from was a chita, was a grain. But let's get past that for a moment and just say that what happens with a grain, the two first things that are grains, chita, sa'ara, the wheat or the barley, either you grind it, you mill it and make it into a flour and then a dough, and then bake it and make it into bread, or you could just you could eat it like without all that preparation, just throw it on the fire, toast it a little bit or whatever it is. You'd make a Hadamah, presumably. There was a whole discussion about that, but let's just say, for example, we'll go with that opinion, you'd make Hadamah. Okay, so if you had to choose between the parched or roasted wheat versus something that came later in that verse, what would you make first? According to this, it's not just that anything that appears in this list of 7 goes before other things. It's even within the list. First you'd make a blessing on the chita before the sa'ara, and first you'd make a blessing on the chita before the te'ena or the geffen, and so on. So that's what these sages say. And number 4, and therefore the idea is that it's not just about within the realm of fruits that the land of Israel's special blessing fruits go first, but it's overall. So you decide which blessing to make, even if it's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and you should always make the blessing first on something of the 7 species before other things. But then again, other Rishonim argue and say that it's not, you could go after the Chaviv. So it's still debated even till today amongst the poskim. Okay, and most of them say, look, if you don't have a favorite, you certainly should pick from the 7 species to go before the other things. So this brings us to number 4. Rabbi Chanan says, no, I don't agree. I don't agree with the rabbis who say that verse teaches us Hadamah, the order of blessings, because all of that verse is the shiurim. It comes to teach us the volume of 7 different things in halacha, very important things we learn out from there. Some of them are more applicable today, such as the law of eating on Yom Kippur, and others are not so applicable today. They have to do with the laws of Tumah and Tahara, ritual impurity, that we don't, for the most part. There are some remnants of them that are still applicable, but for the most part, we don't have the same applicability of them. So what is that? The pasuk says, "Kol pasuk kula l'shiurim namar." It's all said for these various shiurim, And then it goes on and explains what the chita, what the shear of chita is, the shear of the seorah is, the shear of geffen, right? The geffen is a specific amount. It's a revius, that when a nazir can't have wine, it's a revius of wine. Kogrogris, the fig that appears, has to do with certain measurements of what the volume of prohibited malacha of hotza'ah, of carrying something from a private to public, vice versa domain on Shabbos would be. The pomegranate has to do with being metaher, purifying a vessel that has a hole in it. And then Eretz Shemen, the olive oil, Reb Yosef, Reb Chanina says, Eretz Shekol Shiurim Kezesim, a land that all of its measurements are all olives. The Gemara challenges that. What do you mean all the shiurim? You just said there are other shiurim, there are other measurements. So the Gemara says, Rov Shiurim Kezesim, the majority of the shiurim are the size of an olive. Dvash, number 7, the last one of the 7. So the Gemara says, and this we're going to have its own thing. The honey is talking about date honey, so it's really a date. The size of a large date, that's the amount that if you eat on Yom Kippur, you violated the prohibition of not afflicting yourself on Yom Kippur. So that's number 5, is this idea of Yom Kippur versus eating for, let's say, Pesach or Sukkot and other eatings, or eating of non-kosher. Where does it come in, this specific concept of kosevas hadaka, this which is a little bit less than a kebeah, than an egg. So there's 3 general shiurim: a kezayis, kosevas hagasa, and a kebeah that we have to have for this conversation. But let's just for a moment understand that this Rab Chanan appears in a number of places with this statement. The Gemara is ultimately going to reject his opinion. The question is, just because they reject it, is it in fact rejected, or that's, it's a machlokas, it's a debate, like anything, and not, there could be a debate, and the fact is that maybe we can kind of go back and look at things the way he sees things. But let's talk about Yom Kippur, which is number 5, understanding the shiurim for Yom Kippur. So what we have to understand is sometimes the Torah says something very specific. It uses the word achila. So achila, eating, will usually, unless there's an exception, be a kezayis. Will usually be a kezayis. Usually is eating a kezayis is considered eating in these shiurim. So, for example, if you needed to eat matzah on Pesach, so a kezayis of matzah would be eating. Now, of course, there's an argument to be said. For example, we have sukkahs. So there's a machlokas of whether the eating that you're required to do in the sukkah is kezayis or maybe it's a kebeah. There's a whole reason for that debate on the first night of sukkahs. But let's just say in general, when it says don't eat chaleb, don't eat dam, don't eat pigel, all these things that you're not allowed to eat, what is it that you're not allowed to eat that the Torah prohibits? It prohibits a kezayis. So why all of a sudden, when it comes to not eating, and that a person isn't supposed to eat on Yom Kippur, it's not a kebeah, which a kebeah could be considered closer to a greater level of satisfaction. And it's not a kezayis, which is the sheer achila, usually the amount that a person is required to eat or not to eat. And the answer is because we learn it out. The Gemara says numerous times that the inoi, we learn out what eating that you're not supposed to do from the inoi. But it says you should be ma'ana yourself. You should afflict yourself. So what is the opposite of afflicting yourself when it comes to not eating? Eating an amount that gives you some level of satisfaction. You don't get enough satisfaction from the kezayis. You do get satisfaction from the kosevas hagasa, this thick, this juicy, big-sized date, which is almost the size of an egg. So therefore, you have to look at what the Torah is saying. The Gemara always analyzes each case individually to see what is the shear in this context. So that's a little bit about Yom Kippur. That's number 5. Number 6, the shiurim. So the Gemara is going to reject Rav Chanan. Here's how the Gemara rejects it. The Gemara says, well, interestingly enough, the rejection is not necessarily the rabbis as a whole reject it. And I'll read it to you. The Gemara says, V'idach, and the other view, Rav Yosef or Rav Yitzchak, that were the ones who understood that this verse of the 7 species comes to tell you the order of what to make the bracha on first. How do they then extract all of these laws that Rav Chanan said in terms of the shiurim, in terms of the measurements? And they would respond, Hani shiurim behedya miksibi. Do the actual measurements that you're claiming that this verse somehow says, are they explicitly written in the verse? They're not. Ella medarabanan v'kras machabal. Rather, the rabbis came up with these measurements, and the verse that you're quoting is just a support. It's not the actual meaning of it, and therefore the actual meaning is, as I said, it comes to teach us the what we make in terms of the order of the bracha, what bracha comes before what in terms of these specific things, or versus these things versus other things, and so on. So, question is, first of all, the Gemara says in Yuma, for example, I think it's Daf Pei, if I'm not mistaken, Daf 80. It says that the shiurim, we punish people based on these measurements. So if we don't really have a scriptural source for knowing what these measurements are, saying that the rabbis came up with it is very problematic in terms of how we these are the laws that affect so many things. So in fact, usually it says that halacha l'moshe misina, the shiurim are halacha l'moshe misina. That's what it says in Sukkah and other Gemaras. But here it says something strange. I think it may be one of the only times, I'm not sure, where it says it's medarabanan, the rabbis made it. But that's very problematic. So there could be a couple answers. One answer could be that it's a raya for the Rambam. Sometimes the Rambam says something very strange. He says that biblical law is medarabanan. So for example, he says kesef kiddushin, giving money to be mekadosh isha, is medarabanan. We know it's not medarabanan. It's doraisa. When you get married with a ring, you're married. The kiddushin is chal 100% minat Torah. The answer is that medarabanan means it's not clearly written in Torah Shabbat. It's a big chiddush in the Rambam. A lot of people talk about it a lot. So perhaps here medarabanan means it is halacha l'moshe misinai. We're just calling it medarabanan because it isn't minhat Torah in the sense of it being in an actual pasuk. There's no pasuk for it. It's a halacha l'moshe misinai. So that's one answer. We're retranslating what medarabanan means. It doesn't really mean medarabanan. It just means the rabbis were the ones who taught it, but it's based on something that was received. The rabbis received it from Moshe, but for whatever reason we're calling it medarabanan. That's one answer. Another answer is that it could be that there's some type of combination. So for example, the Gemara in Yuma also brings down the concept that these shiurim were forgotten, and then a later bkisnin remembered them. Which means, now usually you can't, the chacham are not allowed to be machadash something, but perhaps we could say that even though the chacham weren't machadash it, but the fact that they rediscovered what the shiurim are has the kayach of the chacham to be kaveya a din d'oraisa, just like the kiddushin, which we say is d'oraisa, but it's the chacham are the ones who taught that the kicha is kiddushin, is kasef. Okay. So another answer could be for this thing about number 6, the shiurim medarabanan, is based on, I believe it's Kalayim and other places where there are times where the chachamim actually go and try to figure out what a measurement of a thing is by the science. They are the scientists that go and it's a natural science to decide how many how much water is a mikvah, because it's based on how a body goes into a body of water. How big is a body, and how big would that body of water be? So there is this concept. The Chachamim are the ones who measured out what the metzias hadavar is. Now, could we then go and rediscover and re-scientifically recalibrate that? No. But it could be that there is some chalos of the Chachamim in their own ability to be meshayir something, to measure something, to then say this is the Chachamim's shir, and it has a total din of minat Torah. It's totally minat Torah, and it's based on the shir of the Chacham or kobeah that they did an actual measurement. Now you could say that for certain things. Let's say some of these things have a metziistic quality. They have to do with a certain svar, a certain logic. Others a little less so. But you could say that since some of them have a concept of being evaluated as a physical entity of what exactly this size is, so we could use the term medarabanan. Okay, that's number 6. Number 7 is the story of Rav Chisda and Rav Hamnuna. What is the story? And it's connected to number 5, and number 3, 4, and 5, about this verse. What's the story? Rav Chisda and Rav Hamnuna were sitting having a meal. They brought before them dates and pomegranates. Rav Hamnuna was given the ability, he was going to make the Bracha. And what did he do? He made the Bracha, Haitz, on the dates. So Rav Chisda said to him, what about Rabbi Yosef's teaching, or Rabbi Yitzchak's teaching? We weren't clear which one it was, but one of those two sages says, Kol hamuktam b'pasuk zeh kadol bracha. Whatever comes first in that verse in Deuteronomy 8:8 about Eretz Kitzur, the seven special species of Eretz Yisrael, that should be what one makes the blessing on first. And here, the pomegranate is number 5. And the date is number 7. So why did you make the bracha on the date first? Amar le Rav Hamnuna responded, Zeh sheni la'aretz v'zeh chamish la'aretz. If you look at the verse carefully, you'll notice that the word eretz, land, right, the land of Israel, appears twice in the verse. How so? Right away, right off the bat, it appears and says that eretz, the land of Chita, Se'ora, Gefen, Te'ena, V'rimo, and it lists 5 things. The last of those 5 things is the pomegranate. And then it says Eretz, again, the land, Zeishem and Dvash, of olive oil and honey, which we're translating as date honey. So the rabbi responded, Rav Hamnuna responded to Rav Chisda. If you look at the verse carefully, I took a date first. The date is the second thing after the latter mention of the land. The pomegranate, although it appears first in the verse, but it's 5th in the order of the first appearance of the land. So it's not just the order of the verse that gives precedence to what blessings you make first. It's the proximity to the word aretz, the word land. When he heard this, when Rav Chisda heard Rav Hamnuna's response, you know what he says? Amar le Rav Hamnuna's Rav Chisda says, Amar le man yavla nagri de parsla v'nishmeyecha. Who would give us steel legs so like we could follow you around? Because you're a font of wisdom. Whatever you come up with amazing ideas that we need to be with you at all times to be able to get your insight. Okay, that's a beautiful story. So some people say that that's the halacha based on this maiserav. That's a lot of times we're kovei la halacha based on a story, even more than words, but what actually happens. Others argue, but that's a beautiful story. So that's number 7. Number 8 is fruit during the meal. We all know, it's the bottom line, it's very simple to everyone, that if you're having fruit during the meal for dessert, if it's a fruit in the some people like to put peaches and raisinets and cranberries in their salad. not my thing, but other people do it. In Brooklyn, it's very popular to like throw in like a whole bunch of fruits in the salad. So then it goes without question that the fruit is part of the salad and the salad is part of the meal. You don't have to make a bracha on the fruit. But what if you're having fruits? Dessert. You want a little fruit platter, little berries and fruits. So that we do know that we make a Haitz, even though we're having the hamotzi generally covers the meal. Although according to Rashi, we're going to learn that Rashi's view on that is not as simple as we think our view is. But be that as it may, the fruits would receive their own bracha. But the truth is, this is a subject of debate, so much so that there was one opinion that says not only should they receive the first bracha, but you should also make a separate bracha achrona on the fruits, separate from the birchas hamazon, the after blessing that you make on the meal. We of course don't hold like that. We do hold that you have to make a bracha rishona on the fruits, but not the bracha achrona. I'm not going to read it inside. But that's in there. That's number 8. Number 9 is this issue of bkisnin. Bkisnin is very relevant today for things like eating pizza, making a mazonos on pizza, or making a hamotzi and washing your hands if you're having a certain amount of pizza. But in this context, it's a little bit different. It's about either during the meal or right after the meal, they would have bkisnin. So what Rashi basically says is it was something they'd eat after the meal. It was good for digestion or the heart or something like that, and they'd eat it after. So even though they ate it after, it was really machmas hasueda. It was really like as a kind of extension of the meal. So therefore, you would not make the full bracha achrona on it. Tosfos really takes issue with Rashi and has a whole nother way of understanding it. So that's number 9. Number 10 is Dvarim habaim machmas hasueda, things that come in the meal because of the meal versus things that are there that are not because of the meal. I mentioned that Rashi has a different shita, so I'll teach that right now. So Rashi says Dvarim habaim machmas hasueda. This is towards the bottom of Min Aleph Amud Beis, about 5 lines from the Y lines in the bottom. Things that come because of the meal. Rashi says lalafis behenas hapas. The things that you eat to be able to eat the bread with, meaning hummus, china, babaganush, salads, all things that they help you eat the bread. So those things are machmas hasueda. Now we don't understand it so narrowly. We understand anything in the meal, unless it's for some reason some strange exception, perhaps like a fruit that we talked about, is included automatically in the hamotzi. Rashi had a much narrower reading of this. Okay, shalom machmas hasueda b'sef hasueda. Rashi explains. I skipped one. Ein tu in a bracha. Those things don't need a bracha. Why not? Because they are secondary. Hilka kol midi be'mazon be'peros shevi'u lafdan. Anything that you bring, right, whether it's food or fruit, but if they're part of like that you dip the bread in, ein bo bracha lo lefanav lo lachav. They don't have a blessing not before them or after them. Now those are covered. But shalom machmas hasueda kigon dice v'chein kru v'tarad. And certain things, let's say they're I think they're like cabbage and beets. She'eno liftam v'bayin lamazon l'soba. They're not things you dip the bread in, but they're very filling. So they're not really, according to Rashi, they're not a tafel. They're not secondary. They have sustenance in and of themselves. So in that case, so there's a machlokas in the Gemara. Tuna bracha lifneim. One opinion says they do need a bracha before them because they're not tafel and they're not part of the bread. However, v'lo lachrein, they don't need a birchas hamazon. We don't paskin like Rashi. That's the bottom line. We don't paskin like this way of Rashi. We say that even hearty foods that you don't dip the bread into are still covered, and other Rishonim are very strongly opposed to Rashi's viewpoint, and that's how we paskin today. Okay, those are number 10, and hope to continue this soon.